My husband disappeared the same week our baby got sick, and while I was trying to cool our son's fever with a wet washcloth and the last tray of melting ice in our freezer, he was across town putting down money for a wedding package with another woman. He thought he had already stepped into a better life. He thought I was too tired, too broke, and too heartbroken to do anything except cry. What he forgot was simple. The house he planned to bring her home to was standing on land that belonged to me. So when he came back smiling, the only thing waiting for him was dust. That morning began with heat, not the kind that comes through curtains after sunrise, not the kind that settles on your shoulders when summer starts early. I mean the kind that comes off a baby's skin when his body is fighting something it cannot explain. My son, Oliver, was 8 months old, and when I lifted him from his crib, his little shirt clung damply to his back. His cheeks were flushed, his breaths were short, every exhale touched my neck like steam. "It's okay," I whispered, rocking him in the dark. "Mommy's here, it's okay." I had been repeating those same words all night. They had stopped sounding like reassurance and started sounding like a prayer. With one hand, I reached across the bed beside me, still half asleep from panic and exhaustion, and touched the other pillow. Cold, empty, untouched. My husband Nolan had been gone for 13 days. At first I told myself he just needed space. Then I told myself he was embarrassed because we had argued over money again. Then I told myself his phone must have died. Then I said maybe he was helping a friend with some contract work. Then maybe he was sleeping at his office because the drive was too long. Then maybe he was angry enough to punish me with silence. By day 13, all those excuses had become thin little scraps of fabric, not enough to cover anything. I picked up my phone and called him again. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I stared at our message thread. My side was full of practical little things, the kind married people send when life is ordinary. "Did you remember diapers? Can you grab milk?" Oliver laughed today. Then the messages got tighter. "Where are you? Please answer. The baby is sick. I need money for the doctor." "Nolan, please." The last message showed, "Read." No reply. Oliver whimpered and pressed his face into my shoulder. I walked him to the kitchen and turned on the weak overhead light. The house looked tired. Not dirty, just tired. In a bottle soaking in the sink. Laundry folded but not put away. Bills tucked under a fruit bowl like they might disappear if I stopped looking directly at them. I checked the cabinet. Half a can of formula. I checked the fridge. Eggs, mustard, 2 slices of bread, and leftover rice. I checked my wallet. $12 and some coins. There are moments when poverty does not arrive like a storm. It arrives like arithmetic. You count, you recount, you subtract what the baby needs first, then what the house needs, then what your body can go without. And somewhere in that math, panic becomes very quiet. I was standing there doing that math when someone pounded hard on my bedroom door. Not once, 3 times, impatient. "Nora!" a voice shouted. "Are you up?" It was Lila, Nolan's younger sister. She had been living with us for almost 6 months, and which was supposed to be temporary. At first, Nolan said she just needed a little time after quitting another job. Then he said family helps family. Then he said I should be more understanding because she was young. Lila was 23, healthy, loud, perfectly capable of working, and somehow always too tired to lift a finger when the house needed anything. She only had energy for makeup, brunches, online shopping, and criticism. I shifted Oliver to my other arm and opened the door. Layla stood there already dressed for the day, hair curled, nails painted the same week-old shade of expensive pink she kept saying she couldn't possibly chip by doing dishes. She held up a white blouse on a hanger like she was presenting evidence in court. "I need this ironed before 11, she said. I stared at her. Lila, the baby, has had a fever all night. She looked past me toward Oliver and shrugged. Babies get fevers. He's burning up. You act like everything is an emergency. Then she shoved the blouse into my free hand and added, "And there are dishes in the sink. I had yogurt, but there were no clean bowls. I felt my face go blank, not because I didn't understand what she was saying, because I understood too well. This was not thoughtlessness. Thoughtlessness forgets. This was worse. This was seeing someone drowning and deciding they still owed you pressed cotton. I need to take him to a clinic, I said. I don't have enough money on me. I haven't heard from Nolan. Can you hold him for 5 minutes while I gather his insurance card? Lila laughed, not loudly, just under her breath, on the kind of laugh people use when they want cruelty to feel casual. My brother is probably out there trying to fix the mess in his life, and you're here making one more problem for him. What mess? She folded her arms. You, this house, constant stress, constant bills, constant drama. I felt something tighten low in my stomach. Our son is sick. She rolled her eyes at the word our, as if I were claiming too much. If you're so worried, call your dad, she said. Isn't that what you do whenever anything goes wrong? Then she walked away down the hall, leaving the blouse hanging from my fingers. The door remained open. I could hear her in the kitchen opening cabinets, sighing loudly, muttering to herself as though she were the one being burdened. Oliver let out a tired cry and buried his face against my chest. And I looked at that white blouse for a long second. Then I dropped it on the floor. People watching stories like this always ask the same question. Why did she stay? Why didn't she leave the first red flag? The second one? The 10th one? I used to ask that too when the hurt belonged to somebody else. The answer is ugly because it is ordinary. Most women do not stay because they enjoy pain. They stay because pain rarely announces itself at full volume in the beginning. It arrives mixed with old tenderness, old promises, shared rent, shared history, shared routines. It arrives wearing the face of someone who once held your hair while you got sick, once kissed your forehead in a parking lot, once made you laugh so hard you forgot your own last name for a second. By the time the cruelty becomes obvious, it is already sitting next to memories you do not know how to bury. So no, I did not stay because I was blind. I stayed because a part of me was still trying to save the version of Nolan I thought I married, and that part of me was about to die. I took Oliver back to the bedroom and changed his diaper on the bed because the changing table had become too much of a luxury when the room felt like it was shrinking. I checked his temperature again, still high. My own hands were shaking now. I needed help, real help. But help costs money, and money had become one of those subjects Nolan always seemed to know more about than I did. That was how it happened gradually. At first it seemed reasonable. He was better with numbers. He liked being in charge. He said I worried too much, and stress was bad for the baby. And he said if one person handled the bills, things would run smoothly. What he meant was, if one person controls the numbers, the other one doesn't know when the bottom is about to drop. I put Oliver down for a moment and walked to Nolan's office. He kept it locked. He said he needed privacy to work. He said papers got mixed up otherwise. He said Lila snooped and he didn't want his things touched. There was a spare key taped above the door frame. He once showed it to me himself, smiling, like that was proof I was trusted. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything looked too neat. The desk was clear. The shelves were straight. The wastebasket had been emptied. Nolan was never that neat during regular weeks. He was the kind of man who left receipts in his jacket pockets and chargers tangled on the floor. Neatness, in his case, meant preparation. I opened the lower cabinet, empty slots where folders should have been. I checked the drawer where he kept travel documents, passport gone. I checked the closet, his dark duffel bag gone. Something inside me went cold. This wasn't a man blowing off steam. This wasn't a husband sleeping at a friend's place after an argument. This was a man who packed a version of his life and removed it quietly while I was busy being a mother. Oliver started crying again, and that sound snapped me back into my body. I went to him, picked him up, and sat on the edge of the bed with him against my shoulder. I could feel sweat on the back of his neck. I opened the family group chat. There were 19 people in it. Nolan's mother, Nolan's siblings, 2 aunts, 3 cousins, only people who sent Bible verses on holidays and gossiped the rest of the year. I usually kept it muted because every conversation somehow ended with someone needing something or judging something. But if Nolan was missing, if he had truly vanished, his family had to know. And if they did know where he was, then my silence was only protecting them. So I typed, "Nolan has been gone almost 2 weeks. Oliver is sick. If he does not answer me today, I am going to file a report and speak to a lawyer." I hit send. My heart pounded while the message sat there under everyone's little profile pictures. 2 minutes later, an unknown number texted me. "Stay quiet. If you make trouble, you lose everything." For a second, I thought I had read it wrong. Then I read it again. "Stay quiet." Not "he's okay," not "call me," not "let's talk." Just a threat. Fear came first, the kind that makes your fingers numb. Then underneath it, anger. Not hot anger, cold anger. The kind that forms when something suddenly makes sense in the worst possible way. If people are threatening you before you know the truth, then the truth is bigger than your fear. I wrapped Oliver in a blanket, grabbed the diaper bag, and called for a ride I could barely afford. We were going to Marlene's house. Marlene was Nolan's mother, and she lived 20 minutes away in the kind of subdivision she loved because every yard followed rules. The bushes were trimmed into shapes. The houses all had painted shutters. There were fake lanterns by the doors and decorative wreaths that changed by season. Marlene believed beauty meant control. If she could make the outside look respectable, then maybe nobody would ask why the inside of her family felt like broken glass. When she opened the door, her expression did not change when she saw Oliver. That was the first thing I noticed. No concern, no glance at his flushed face. No, "What happened?" Just irritation. "You really posted that in the family chat?" she said. "How embarrassing." "Marlene, where is Nolan?" She leaned against the door frame like we were discussing a menu. "He's working." Then why hasn't he answered? Why has he been gone 13 days? Why is his phone off? He does not owe you a report every hour. Our baby has a fever. She sighed as though I had interrupted her on purpose. "Nora, men under pressure do not respond well to nagging." I stared at her. "Neglecting your son is not pressure, it's neglect." Her eyes sharpened. "You have always had a dramatic streak." There was a time when statements like that worked on me. That is the thing about being gaslit by a family instead of a single person. It starts to sound like weather. You begin thinking, maybe your pain really is louder than everyone else's. Maybe your expectations are too high. Maybe your need for honesty is just another word for difficult. But that day, I was too exhausted to cooperate. Where is he? He's handling responsibilities. What responsibilities? The debt. I blinked. What debt? Marlene crossed her arms. The debt from your hospital delivery, the extra care, the baby costs. You think money grows on trees? I felt my mouth go dry. Nolan had never once said we were in debt over the birth. He had told me we were tight for a while. He had told me not to worry. When he had told me he was managing. Marlene watched my face while she spoke. That was how I knew she was measuring the effect, not telling the truth. She wanted confusion. She wanted guilt. She wanted me to leave feeling like the burden so I would be too ashamed to keep asking. I shifted Oliver higher in my arms. He whimpered. "I need to get him seen." "Then go," she said. "But stop humiliating my son with your threats." Her son. Not my husband, not Oliver's father. Her son. I turned to leave, and as I stepped off the porch, a silver sedan pulled into the driveway next door. Mrs. Donnelly from her church was behind the wheel. She was one of those older women who always meant well and therefore accidentally exposed things by speaking too easily. "Oh, Nora," she called out, rolling down her window. "I thought you'd be in the city for Nolan's event." My heart kicked. What event? The woman's smile faltered. She glanced at Marlene, then back at me. "Oh, maybe I heard wrong." No, she hadn't. I looked at Marlene. For less than a second, her face slipped. That tiny little slip told me more than any confession would have. I left with Oliver in my arms and a hole widening in my chest. On the bus ride back, he fell asleep against me, hot and limp and trusting. His breathing had settled some, but not enough to calm me. I sat near the back, staring at the city blur past the window, and tried to understand the shape of what was happening. A threat message, a lie about debt, an event, a packed bag, a missing passport. When your mind meets betrayal before your heart is ready, it does something strange. It does not reject the truth immediately. It circles it like an animal circling fire. You can feel the heat before you admit what is burning. At the small park near our block, I stopped to sit for a minute because my legs felt weak. I opened my phone and saw a message from Tessa, my oldest friend. Tessa worked for a catering company that handled expensive events, corporate galas, foundation dinners, wedding receptions for people who liked ice sculptures and printed menu cards. Her message had come the night before, but I had missed it in the chaos. "Do you and Nolan have something this weekend?" I saw his name on a high-end event package and wondered if it was family-related. I called her instantly. She answered on the second ring. "Nora, are you okay? You sound out of breath." "What event did you mean?" There was noise around her. A clinking dishes, people talking, the hum of work, a pause. "Tessa, please." She lowered her voice. "I saw the booking yesterday. Nolan Price, cash deposit, premium wedding package. I thought it had to be someone else, so I checked the contact sheet." My throat tightened. "For what date?" "This weekend." I could hear my own breathing now, rough and uneven. There has to be another Nolan. The billing address matched his old office. My fingers dug into the edge of the bench. And the bride? Another pause. Vanessa Hale. I had never heard that name in my life, but it felt like something being carved into me as she said it. I think I laughed. A strange, broken little sound. Not because anything was funny, because the human body does stupid things when it gets hit too hard all at once. "No," I whispered. "Nora, and I'm sorry." "How much was the deposit?" $5,000. $5,000. We were living on $12 and half a can of formula. Tessa asked where I was, asked if I needed her to come get me, asked if Oliver was with me. I answered her in pieces and told her to send me whatever proof she could, not because I still doubted, because some part of me already understood that truth without proof is just another thing cruel people can call unstable. When I got home, Lila was sitting at the kitchen table eating pastry from a box I recognized from the expensive bakery inside Nordstrom. There were shopping bags at her feet. I stopped in the doorway. "Where did you get that?" She looked up slowly, chewing. "My brother sent me money." My ears started ringing. "Your brother sent you money." She licked sugar from her finger. "And he takes care of people who matter." I walked closer. "Our power is about to be cut. Your nephew is sick." She smirked. "Maybe don't make a man hate being home." That sentence did something to me. Not because it was new, because it was final. There are insults you can shrug off. There are insults you can cry over. Then there are insults that reveal the whole system under the family. Lila wasn't speaking as herself anymore. She was speaking as someone who had been briefed. Everyone knew something. Everyone except me. I went to the bedroom, laid Oliver down, and opened the closet where Nolan stored old electronics. There was a cracked tablet inside, one he had stopped using after getting a new phone. He had once synced cloud photos to it. I remembered because I'd complained about storage space. But the battery was nearly dead when I turned it on. The screen flickered, loaded slowly, and then opened to his last synced folders. One of them was called New Start. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down on the floor. Inside were photos. Nolan in a tux fitting. Nolan beside a woman with glossy dark hair laughing in a bridal boutique. Nolan holding champagne in front of a floral wall. Nolan smiling. That was the part that hurt most at first. Not the other woman, not the suit, the smile. He looked lighter there than he had looked with me in months. If he had seemed guilty, maybe I could have hated him faster. But joy on a betrayer's face has its own cruelty. It tells you they did not merely escape you. They upgraded from you in their own mind. The tablet battery died in my hands, the screen going black before I could even finish looking. I sat on the floor in the dark reflection of that dead screen and finally said the sentence I had been avoiding. My husband was leaving me for another woman, not planning to, not maybe considering it, doing it. And he had done it while our baby had a fever. The power shut off the next morning. Not a flicker, not a warning, just silence. The refrigerator stopped humming. The fan slowed and died. The digital clock on the microwave vanished. The house became still in a way that felt almost hostile. I texted Nolan one last time. The power is off. Oliver is sick. Please at least pay the bill. The message changed to read. No reply. That one detail matters because people always imagine betrayal as dramatic. Affairs, hotel rooms, lies, secret dinners. But there is another form of betrayal that cuts deeper in families, being seen and still not helped. He saw my message. He saw the words, "Your son is sick." He chose silence. That was his answer. At 10 that morning, a moving truck pulled up outside. For one ridiculous second, hope hit me before sense did. I thought maybe Nolan had finally come home. Then 2 men in black work shirts stepped out. Behind them came Lila, wearing sunglasses and carrying a coffee like she was supervising an event. She walked straight into the living room. Take the television, the speakers, the watch box from the cabinet, his suit bags from the guest room. I stepped in front of them. "What are you doing?" "Moving Nolan's things," she said. "You cannot just walk into my house." She laughed. "This is Nolan's house." The words rang in the room. "No," I said. More to myself than to her. "It isn't." She took off her sunglasses and gave me a look full of that polished contempt she saved for moments she thought she was winning. "He doesn't want his expensive things ruined here," she said. "The power's out, it smells weird, and honestly, who knows what shape this place will be in when he decides what to do with it." What to do with it? That phrasing told me more than she meant it to. "He spoke to you?" I asked. "He speaks to you, but not to me?" She shrugged. "My brother doesn't need this kind of drama while he's focused." "Focused on what?" She smiled. "Just enough. His future." I think she wanted me to beg. She wanted me to ask questions in a broken voice so she could throw crumbs of humiliation one by one. Instead, I said, "Leave the baby's formula." She snorted. When then she reached into her purse, pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and tossed it onto the table. "Buy a candle." I stared at that bill on the wood. $5 from the man who had $5,000 for a wedding deposit. The movers brushed past me with his things. The TV, the speaker system, the leather duffel, his watches, his expensive coat. Every item they carried out was like a sentence. "I am keeping what I value. I am removing what I might miss. You are not on that list." When the truck left, the house felt larger and emptier and more honest. I stood in the living room holding Oliver while the $5 bill lay on the table like an insult printed by the government. People think revenge begins with rage. Sometimes it begins with clarity. I picked up the bill, folded it once, twice, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I called my father. My father's name is Frank, and he has never been a man who wastes words. He is a carpenter by trade, careful with measurements, careful with speech, careful with promises. When I married Nolan, he did not object loudly. That wasn't his way. He only said one thing to me the week before the wedding. "A man who wants your loyalty more than your trust will eventually ask for your silence too." At the time, I thought he was being old-fashioned, suspicious, protective. Turns out he was being accurate. When he heard my voice on the phone, he didn't ask how I was. He asked, "What happened?" I told him the shortest version. Nolan married someone else. There was silence. Then, "Bring the baby and come here." I drove to his house that afternoon with a diaper bag, one change of clothes, a sleeping child, and the kind of hollow chest that feels like your ribs are holding air for someone who already died. My father opened the door before I knocked. He took one look at me and stepped aside. No lecture, no "I warned you," no anger, just space. And that is how real safety feels when you have not had it in a while. It doesn't crowd you. It makes room. I sat on the sofa I grew up falling asleep on during rainy afternoons. Oliver slept against me. I cried, not gracefully, not in a movie way. I cried until my face hurt. I cried over the wedding package, the threat message, the moving truck, the dark house, the smile in those photos. I cried because a part of me was still embarrassed, and humiliation is one of the loneliest pains there is. My father listened. When I was done, he stood, disappeared into his bedroom, and came back with a weathered folder sealed inside a plastic sleeve. He set it on the coffee table. "What's that?" I asked. "The original deed to your mother's land." I stared at him. He nodded once. "Nolan paid to build that house," he said, "but he built it on land your mother left to you. I told you to leave the title separate. You listened, even if you forgot why." My hands started shaking again, but this time from something different. Not grief, relief with teeth. I opened the folder and saw my name. It is hard to explain what that did to me in that moment. Until then, I had been thinking like an abandoned wife, a humiliated woman, a desperate mother. But the deed shifted something fundamental. It reminded me that before Nolan, before marriage, before his family's opinions and his money management and his disappearing act, I belonged to myself. I had history. I had inheritance. I had ground under my feet that did not come from him. My father watched me take it in. Then he said, "Whatever you do next, do not confuse kindness with surrender." That sentence stayed in me. That evening, I did something I should not have done if I were trying to preserve peace. I went to the wedding venue. Maybe I needed one last piece of undeniable truth. Maybe I needed to see with my own eyes what kind of man could look at his life and replace it so neatly. Maybe some part of me still wanted him to see Oliver and collapse under shame. The venue stood on the edge of the city, white stone and high windows and manicured gardens. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Flowers taller than I was framed the doors. I wore the best dress I owned, not because I thought I belonged there, but because humiliation already strips enough from a person. I wasn't going to hand it my dignity, too. Oliver was fussy from the heat. I held him close and walked toward the entrance. 2 security men stopped me before I reached the doors. "Invitation, ma'am." "I'm Nolan Price's wife." The taller one glanced at the other, then back at me with the expression service people wear when they are trying not to show pity. "The groom's wife is inside." "My child is his son." That got some attention. Heads turned. A few guests slowed. But embarrassment rarely moves people toward you. It pushes them back so they can watch from safety. "I need to speak to him." The guard's face hardened. "I can't let you in." Then the doors opened behind him and I saw Nolan. Gray suit, fresh haircut, clean shave, laughing at something Vanessa Hale had just said. She was beautiful in the kind of polished way wealth makes easier. Luminous skin, perfect posture, dress fitted like a promise. Nolan looked up. Our eyes met. He saw me. He saw Oliver. He knew. There was a flicker in his face. Not guilt, exactly. Recognition. Calculation. Then he turned away. Just turned. He leaned toward Vanessa and said something that made her smile. One of the guards stepped closer to me. "Please leave." I do not remember everything after that with perfect clarity. I remember Oliver crying when the tension in my body changed. I remember the rough edge of the sidewalk under my sandal. I remember hearing a woman whisper, "Oh my God." I remember the guard taking my elbow, not violently but firmly enough to leave no doubt. I remember standing outside those doors while inside, music resumed. Public humiliation burns off fantasy better than almost anything. By the time I got back to my father's house, I was no longer crying. That part was over. I told him what happened. He listened the same way he always listened, with his hands still and his jaw set and his eyes on me, not the room. When I finished, he asked, "What do you want?" Not what should happen, not what would look best. What do you want? I thought about Nolan bringing Vanessa into that house, into my kitchen, into the nursery I had painted, into the bedroom where I labored through contractions while he promised me we were a team. I thought about the dark house, the $5 bill, the wedding deposit. Then I said, "I want my land back." My father nodded once, then he gave me the number of a contractor he trusted. His name was Rowan. Rowan and I had known each other vaguely in high school. He was a year older, broad-shouldered even then, the kind of boy who seemed to belong in work boots before he was old enough to drive. We had not spoken in years. I called him from the back porch while my father fed Oliver a bottle of cooled formula we had bought on the way home. When Rowan answered, I almost hung up. "Nora, I need a property cleared," I said. A pause. Cleared how? Demolished. Longer pause. That is a serious ask. I know. Is it yours? Yes. The land? Yes. The structure? The structure was built during my marriage, but the land is mine. He let out a breath through his nose. Then before I move a machine 1 inch, I need documentation. I have it. Another silence. You sure you want to do this? No, but also yes. That is the strange shape of hard decisions. You can be uncertain about the pain and certain about the necessity at the same time. I'm sure. We met the next morning at the property line. Rowan walked the perimeter, studied the paperwork, checked the county map, asked careful questions, and never once treated me like I was hysterical. That mattered more than I can explain. When a woman has been made to feel unreasonable for too long, being handled with factual respect can feel like oxygen. He said the demolition could be done. He said there would be consequences, paperwork, noise, legal discomfort. He said if Nolan contested anything, the land deed would matter more than wounded pride. Then he asked the question again. Do you want me to do this because you're angry or because you're done? I looked at the house. And I was angry yesterday, I said. Today I'm done. That afternoon I started packing. Only my things. Only Oliver's things. That part was important to me. I did not want anyone saying later that I stole Nolan's property or acted like some wild woman burning down a life out of spite. I wanted sharp lines, clean lines. My clothes, my son's clothes, my documents. The framed photo of my mother from the hallway, Oliver's first blanket, his medical papers, my jewelry box, though there wasn't much in it. My laptop, the recipe tin my mother left me, the rocking chair from the nursery because my father had built it. Everything else stayed. Tessa came after work to help. She brought coffee and tape, and that beautiful kind of loyalty that does not ask whether something sounds crazy before helping you survive it. Till at one point she stopped packing and looked around the half-empty living room. I can't believe he thought he'd just move her in here. I folded a stack of Oliver's onesies. He thought I'd still be here waiting. Tessa shook her head. Men like that always think the same thing, that your pain is a room they can leave you in until they need you quiet again. We worked until after midnight. At some point, the porch light flicked on. I looked up, startled. Did you pay the power? No, Tessa said. We checked the breaker. Then the kitchen clock blinked back to life. Power restored. I stood there staring through the front window at the porch light glowing warm over the yard. They had paid it remotely. Not to help us. Not when Oliver was feverish. Not when I begged. They paid it after removing Nolan's valuables. So the house would look normal. When that detail made me so calm, it frightened me. A lit porch can hide a dead home. A smiling family can hide cruelty. A wedding can hide a lie. A paid bill can hide abandonment. "Leave it on," I said. Tessa looked at me. "I want them to think I'm still here." That was the moment strategy replaced grief. Before we left, I wrote a note and set it on the hallway table. "I hope this light is bright enough to guide you back to what you left behind. Maybe it was dramatic. Maybe I earned the right." The next morning, I sent a formal notice by courier to Marlene's house and to Nolan's old office. Copy of the deed, notice of property reclamation, statement that the structure would be removed, contact number for my lawyer, who was technically my father's lawyer until that week. I wanted a paper trail. What I did not know was that Lila intercepted the envelope sent to Marlene's house, opened it, and tore it up after glancing at the first page. Later, I learned she assumed it was another emotional stunt. She never told Nolan. She never told his mother. Carelessness is a strange accomplice to justice sometimes. By dawn the next day, Rowan's crew was outside my house. Heavy machines sound different in a quiet residential street than they do on a highway job site. In a neighborhood, they sound like consequence, like truth becoming visible, like a private collapse refusing to stay private. Neighbors began drifting out in robes and slippers, coffee mugs in hand, faces bright with alarm and curiosity. Curtains shifted, doors cracked open. The whole block seemed to inhale at once. I stood at the curb holding Oliver, who was finally fever-free and drowsy against my shoulder. My father stood beside me. Tessa had taken the morning off to be there. Rowan walked over one last time with the clipboard. "I can still stand the crew down," he said quietly. I looked at the house. The nursery curtains I had sewn myself were still in the window. The porch planter I had bought on sale last spring sat by the steps. The wind chime from our second anniversary barely moved in the morning air. A life does not become false all at once just because the ending is ugly. There had been real moments inside those walls, real laughter, real hope, real softness. That is what makes betrayal expensive. It ruins things that were not all fake. For 1 second, I almost said stop. Then I remembered Oliver sweating through his pajamas while Nolan read my message and chose silence. I remembered the wedding package. I remembered the $5 bill. I looked at Rowan. Start. The machine moved. The first bite into the sidewall made a cracking sound so violent that someone on the sidewalk gasped. Wood splintered, glass burst, plaster dust shot into the air. The porch column tilted and snapped. I did not flinch. Each strike felt like a translation. The house was saying out loud what the marriage had been whispering for a long time. Over, over, over. By the time half the front room was exposed to the street, Marlene's SUV turned the corner. She hit the brakes hard enough for the tires to scream. The driver's door flew open, and she stumbled out before the engine even finished rocking. "What are you doing?" she screamed. I turned to face her. "We're taking back my land." She looked from me to the machine to the torn open front of the house as if language itself had stopped working. "You ungrateful little—" "Careful," my father said. She snapped her head toward him. "This is your doing." He didn't answer. That infuriated her more than shouting would have. She stormed closer, waving her hands, eyes wide with outrage. Not grief, outrage. There is a difference. Grief looks stunned. Outrage looks insulted. Marlene was not mourning a home. She was watching status collapse in public. "This house belongs to my son." "No," I said. "The walls were built by your son. The ground belongs to me." The second machine hit what had been the living room beam. A deeper crack. A sag. More dust. Marlene screamed for them to stop. No one did. Then another car turned onto the street. Nolan's black sedan. Vanessa in the passenger seat. For one surreal second, they looked almost ordinary. Newly married. Tired from celebration. He was loosened at the collar, one hand on the wheel. She had sunglasses in her hair and one of those pale cashmere wraps draped around her shoulders. They were probably coming back from brunch, from photos, from whatever people do the morning after they think they've won. Then Nolan saw the crowd, then the machine, then the house, then me. He slammed the brakes and got out. "What the hell is this?" I held up the file in my hand. "This," I said, "is what happens when you build your future on someone else's property." Vanessa stepped out more slowly. "Nolan," she said, not taking her eyes off me. "Who is that?" He didn't answer quickly enough. That was fatal. "I'm his wife," I said, "the one he forgot to divorce. Oh, and this is his son." The street went still in that sharp, electric way crowds go still when a sentence rearranges the scene in front of them. Vanessa turned to look at him. His face did something ugly then, not remorse. Calculation. The same calculation I saw at the venue. Which lie works fastest? Which version costs least? "Nora," he said, taking a step forward, "this is not how we should talk about this." I almost smiled. "Should?" Marlene cut in. "She's unstable. She's been threatening everyone." I pulled the courier receipts from the folder. I sent notice. I sent copies. I sent legal contact information. If you didn't see it, ask your daughter. Marlene's eyes flicked for just a fraction toward Lila's empty passenger seat. That was enough. She knew. Nolan looked confused for the first time. What notice?" The excavator tore through the upper wall where our bedroom had been. A section of roof caved. Everyone looked up instinctively as debris crashed inward. Vanessa took a full step back from Nolan. "What is she talking about?" I handed her a copy of the deed. She stared at it. "I don't understand." "The land under this house belongs to me," I said. "It belonged to my mother before me. He built on it while married to me. Then he left me and our child in a dark house while he planned a wedding with you." "That's not true," Marlene snapped. So I handed Vanessa the next paper, the catering confirmation Tessa had sent me. Cash deposit, date, names. Vanessa scanned it, then looked up at Nolan. "You told me you were separated." He reached for her hand. She pulled away. "Nora," he said, dropping his voice into that soft, reasonable tone men use when they are trying to appear sane beside the chaos they created. "Can we not do this publicly?" I laughed then. I really did, publicly. As if public humiliation were beneath him now. "You watched a guard remove me from your wedding while I held your son." His face hardened. "That's not what happened." "Oh, then tell her what happened." Vanessa looked between us. Nolan said nothing, because lies work best when the injured person is alone. In daylight, before witnesses, with paperwork in hand and a collapsing house behind him, his talent for narrative finally failed. Marlene started shouting that I was vindictive, cruel, crazy, that I would be sued, that I had destroyed a man's investment. "A man's investment," I said. "You mean the man who shut off power on his own baby? The man who could pay $5,000 for flowers and salmon, but not a utility bill?" A murmur moved through the neighbors. That is what people like Marlene always underestimate. Shame is powerful in private. In public, detail matters more. One specific detail, a sick child, a cut utility, a wedding deposit, can puncture years of social polish. Vanessa looked sick now, not dramatic, just pale and suddenly old around the eyes. She held the deed, then the catering paper, then looked at Oliver asleep against my shoulder. "When were you going to tell me?" she asked Nolan quietly. He said her name like a warning. She took another step back. "When?" His silence answered. The machine clawed through the dining room wall. The chandelier crashed. A wave of dust rolled over the yard. Vanessa slipped her wedding ring off slowly and placed it in Nolan's palm. She didn't yell. That would have made it easier for him. Quiet disgust is harder to fight. Then she turned, got back into the car she came in, and told the driver to leave. Marlene shouted after her. Nolan stood there with the ring in his hand and dust on his shoes, watching the second life he built fold in on itself before he ever got to live in it. For the first time since I had known him, he looked small. Not misunderstood, not burdened, not pressured, small. He turned back to me with something like panic breaking through. "You can't just do this." "I already did." He ran a hand through his hair. "That house is worth hundreds of thousands." I nodded toward Oliver. "He was worth one paid bill." He opened his mouth, closed it. My lawyer, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier and stayed at the edge of the crowd until the key facts were undeniable, stepped forward then and handed Nolan an envelope. Petition for dissolution, emergency custody request, notice of property action. Nolan looked at the documents like the paper itself might bite him. Marlene lunged for them. The lawyer pulled them back. "Mrs. Price," he said calmly, "I recommend you stop making threats in public." The neighbors were still filming. That detail mattered. Cruel families survive on two things: control of narrative and privacy of abuse. Take either one away and the mask slips. Take both away and they unravel. By late afternoon, the house was gone. Not a dramatic movie-level explosion. Real demolition is slower, uglier, more practical. Walls crushed, beams cut, wiring exposed. Your rooms turned into fragments. The nursery, the kitchen, the hallway where I used to rock Oliver at 2 a.m. All of it reduced piece by piece until nothing recognizable remained. When the last major section dropped, the street went strangely quiet. No one clapped. No one cheered. This wasn't triumph in the childish sense. It was stranger than that. Heavier. Cleaner. The lot looked wounded, but it also looked honest. I stood there after most of the neighbors drifted away. Oliver slept against me, his fever broken at last, heavy and warm and alive. Tessa stood a few feet back. My father had one hand in his pocket, the other resting on the top of a shovel Rowan's crew had left nearby. It looked almost ceremonial. Nolan and Marlene had finally gone. There was nothing left for them to perform against. The sun was lowering. Dust settled in layers over the weeds and broken concrete, and I realized something that startled me by how peaceful it felt. I was not empty. I had expected maybe grief to swallow me after the adrenaline wore off, maybe regret, maybe some huge collapse once the noise stopped. But what I felt instead was space. Space where panic had been, space where waiting had been, space where humiliation had lived rent-free in my body. People think losing the structure means losing everything. Sometimes the structure was the cage. Sometimes what looks like destruction is simply the first honest shape your life has taken in years. In the days that followed, the calls started. First from people speaking on Marlene's behalf, then from cousins who just wanted to understand, then from Nolan himself. His first message said, "We need to talk like adults." His second said, "You went too far." Neither one mentioned Oliver by name. That told me everything. My lawyer handled the rest. Because the land was mine before the marriage. The legal core was strong. Nolan had invested in the structure, yes, but he had made those investments on property he did not own. He had also entered a new marriage under false pretenses, at minimum deceiving Vanessa about the state of our relationship. The details did not make him look noble in paperwork, and paperwork is where charm finally dies. Marlene tried a different approach after the threats failed. She sent a message through an aunt saying she forgave my outburst. That made me laugh harder than anything else in that whole nightmare. Forgiveness from the woman who told me my husband's disappearance was my fault. People like Marlene treat accountability the way vampires treat sunlight. They cannot stand direct exposure, so they rename it. Your boundary becomes cruelty. Your proof becomes drama. Your refusal to submit becomes instability. Once you see that pattern clearly, you cannot unsee it. I moved into a small rental 3 months later. Not glamorous. 2 bedrooms, narrow kitchen, clinic 5 minutes away, grocery store within walking distance, a little patch of yard just big enough for a toy truck and a folding chair. The first night there, after Oliver fell asleep in his new crib, I sat on the floor against the wall and listened. No shouting, no doors slamming, no Lila scoffing down the hallway, no message thread waiting to punish me with silence. Just quiet. Real quiet. Not the quiet of abandonment. The quiet of safety. I sold the land 6 months after the demolition. Some people were shocked by that. They thought, after all of it, I would build again there. But I didn't want another house on that lot. Not because I was afraid of memory, because I was done proving anything on that piece of earth. My mother's land had done its work. It had held truth when I needed something solid. It had given me leverage when I had none. It had carried me from humiliation back into ownership. I didn't owe that place another chapter. The sale money was enough to set aside a cushion, pay legal fees, clear a few debts I hadn't fully known Nolan had left tangled in our accounts, and create a safer life for Oliver and me. I took online bookkeeping work at first because numbers no longer frightened me the way they used to. Funny how betrayal can educate you. Every statement, every utility bill, every transfer became something I learned to read instead of something I was told not to worry about. Tessa joked that Nolan accidentally trained me into the exact woman he wouldn't have been able to control. She wasn't wrong. As for Vanessa, I heard later through people who love gossip more than dignity that she annulled what she could and left town for a while. I don't blame her for any of it. Wealth does not protect women from lies. It only changes the furniture around the lie. Sometimes I wondered if she replayed the street that day the way I did. The dust, the papers in her hand, the ring in Nolan's palm, the moment she realized she had not been chosen over a failed marriage. She had been recruited into an unfinished betrayal. There is a difference. Nolan kept trying for a few months, and apologies that were not apologies. I was overwhelmed. You know how my mother is. I didn't know how to fix things. I never wanted it to happen like this. All versions of the same cowardice. Men like Nolan always want their motives to matter more than their choices. They want confusion to soften the edges of harm. They want to be seen as weak, not cruel, because weak sounds forgivable. But weakness does not cut power to a sick child and book a wedding package in the same week. That takes intention. So I stopped replying. My father visited every Sunday that first year. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he fixed little things I could have paid someone else to handle, not because he thought I couldn't, but because building a new life is easier when someone hands you stability in quiet ways. One evening, while Oliver was asleep and we were drinking coffee at my tiny kitchen table, I asked him something I had been afraid to hear. "Did you know Nolan was like this?" My father looked down into his cup. "No," he said, "not like this." "Then why didn't you trust him?" He took a long breath. "Because he liked being admired more than being known." I thought about that for days. Admired more than known. That was Nolan exactly. He loved the image of being the provider, the helpful son, the generous brother, the husband managing everything. But being known requires letting someone see your pettiness, your fear, your selfishness, your debt, your weakness, your lies. Admiration only requires performance, and performance is exhausting. Eventually, men like that look for a new audience instead of becoming honest. I do not tell this story because I think every betrayed woman should demolish a house. I tell it because sometimes people need to hear what it sounds like when a woman stops negotiating with her own disappearance. That is what changed my life. Not the machine, not the legal papers, not the crowd, the no. The first real no. No, you do not get to leave me in the dark and call that pressure. No, you do not get to fund your sister while your son is sick. No, you do not get to erase me with silence. No, you do not get to bring another woman into a home built over my mother's name. No, you do not get to rewrite me as unstable because I brought proof. There are women listening to this right now who are still in the waiting stage, still counting excuses, still calling phones that go unanswered, still telling themselves they need one more piece of certainty before they are allowed to trust their own pain. I understand them, more than I wish I did. But there is something I need them to hear. Your confusion does not mean you are wrong. Your kindness does not obligate you to disappear. Your patience is not a blank check for someone else's cruelty. And the fact that you loved sincerely does not mean you owe endless access to the person who weaponized that love. There is a kind of violence that leaves bruises. There's another kind that leaves you doubting the evidence of your own life. The second kind can take longer to heal because you have to recover, not just from what they did, but from what they convinced you to ignore. That is why proof mattered so much in my story. The deed, the receipt, the message, the photographs. The silence after read. People talk about evidence like it is cold, legal, dry. Sometimes evidence is emotional rescue. Sometimes a single page with your name on it can return more oxygen to your body than an apology ever could. The day I held the deed in my father's living room, I did not only gain leverage over a property dispute, I gained language. I was no longer just the abandoned wife. I was the legal owner, the daughter of a woman whose name still held weight, the mother of a child who deserved better, the witness to my own life. That matters. Because the deepest injury in what Nolan did was not that he loved another woman. It was that he tried to remove me from my own story before I had even realized the story was changing. He wanted me to remain the tired woman in the dark house, begging the wrong door for help, on while he advanced the plot elsewhere. What he did not understand is that people like me survive longer than people like him perform. That morning, years later, when Oliver was old enough to ask questions, he found a small toy excavator in a bin at a thrift shop and held it up to me. "Can I get this one?" I looked at the yellow plastic machine in his hand and laughed so hard the cashier turned toward me. "Yeah," I said, "you can get that one." He pushed it around the apartment floor for weeks, making engine noises, crashing it into couch cushions, smiling every time. He had no memory of the real machine or the real house. Thank God. Children should not have to remember the architecture of betrayal. But I remembered, not with pain anymore, with perspective. I remember the porch light glowing over an empty lie. I remember the first wall breaking open. I remember Vanessa's hand going still over the deed. I remember my father's face when he said not to confuse kindness with surrender. I remember holding my son and realizing I was not watching my life collapse. I was watching a false version of it finally end. That is a different thing. I sold the land, yes, but I kept my name. I lost the house, but I kept my son. I buried the marriage, but I kept my dignity. And now, when people tell me I was brave, I always think the same thing. Brave wasn't the first thing I was. First I was confused, then ashamed, then scared, then humiliated, then clear. Clarity came before courage. That is important because many women think courage has to arrive like lightning. It doesn't. Sometimes it arrives like paperwork. Like a friend who answers on the second ring. Like a father opening the door without questions. Like a contractor saying, "Are you sure?" and finally meaning your certainty matters. Like your own voice, quiet and shaking, saying, "No one, more time until the shaking stops." If you are in the middle of something like this, I cannot tell you exactly what your version of freedom will look like. Maybe it won't be dramatic. Maybe there will be no crowd, no dust, no ring returned in public, no street full of witnesses. Maybe your freedom will be a lease signed quietly, a bank account opened secretly, a folder of copied documents, a therapist's office, a custody schedule, a packed bag in the trunk, a number blocked, a key returned, a lawyer hired, a door locked, and a breath taken in a room where no one is punishing you for needing honesty. That counts too. Do not measure the worth of your escape by how cinematic it looks. Measure it by whether you can hear yourself again after. That is how I knew I had done the right thing. Not because Nolan suffered, though he did. Not because Marlene was embarrassed, though she was. Not because the neighbors had a story for years, though I'm sure they did. I knew because for the first time in a long time, I could hear my own thoughts without his absence, sitting in the middle of them like furniture. Peace built on lies is not peace. It is only a well-lit prison, and love that requires your silence is not love. It is a transaction where you are always the price. So if you are listening and you have ever been made to feel like you were too emotional for reacting to cruelty, hear me. If your pain has facts, it is not drama. If your body keeps flinching at someone's footsteps, that is not oversensitivity. If your child is learning tension before language, that is not a phase. If you are always the one asked to understand, forgive, wait, stretch, adjust, excuse, cover, and endure, you are not in a partnership. You are in a system. And systems do not change because you cry harder inside them. They change when you stop cooperating. The world likes women patient, tired, adjustable, grateful for scraps, quick to self-correct, slow to accuse, willing to protect the image of the very people harming them. I was that woman once. Then my baby got a fever. Then my husband vanished. Then my phone lit up with a threat. Then a wedding contract told me more truth than my marriage had. Then a deed with my name on it reminded me that ground still existed under my feet. And after that, I was never going to be that woman again. Sometimes people ask me what Nolan said the last time I saw him in person. It wasn't dramatic. Months later, outside a mediation office, he looked older, less polished, smaller somehow. He asked if I hated him. I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I said. That surprised him. "I don't hate you. Hate would mean I still carry you." He had no answer to that, and I walked away. That is the ending I prefer now. Not the dust, not the broken walls, not Marlene shouting in the street. Those belong to the chapter where pain had to become visible in order to end. My real ending was quieter, and it was walking away from a man who had mistaken my softness for permanent access. It was going home to a small place with cheap blinds and secondhand furniture and no luxury at all, and feeling richer there than I ever felt in that big house. It was knowing my son would grow up learning that home is not where a man says you belong. Home is where safety stays when truth arrives. So yes. My husband disappeared while our baby was sick. He planned a wedding with another woman while I counted coins in a dark kitchen. He thought he could replace me, remove me, and return to the house like he had only changed outfits. But he forgot one thing. He could buy walls. He could stage flowers. He could book music. He could promise forever to the wrong woman in the prettiest room in town. What he could not buy was the ground. That part was mine. And when a woman finally remembers what is hers, the whole story changes.